The stars had always been cold and silent. For millions of years, they burned in the darkness, watching civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. But on this particular night, the silence was broken by a scream that traveled across the void of space. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka sat in the command chair of the UEN Perseverance, a medium-sized patrol ship that had been flying through the Orion Spur for the past 3 weeks. It was boring work. Nothing ever happened on these patrols. The crew spent most of their time playing cards, watching old movies, and counting the days until they could return home to Earth. Yuki was reading a book on her tablet when her communications officer, a young man named David Chen, suddenly sat up straight in his chair. His face went pale, and his hands began to shake as he adjusted his headset. "Commander," he said, his voice trembling, "we are receiving an emergency signal. Old Concorde frequency. I have not heard this type of signal in years." Yuki put down her tablet and walked over to his station. "Put it on the speakers." The sound that filled the bridge made everyone stop what they were doing. It was broken and filled with static, but the terror in the voice was clear. Words came through in pieces, desperate and afraid. "Please, anyone. They came from the sky, taking us, harvesting. Please help. They are harvesting us." The message repeated again and again, each time more desperate than the last. Yuki felt her blood turn cold. She knew that voice. It belonged to a Velith, one of the gentle insect-like beings who lived on the far side of the galaxy. "Where is it coming from?" she asked. David's fingers moved across his console. "Sanctuary 7, Commander. It is a Velith colony world in the Outer Territories." Yuki closed her eyes. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about the Velith. 300 years ago, during the Collapse War, a human fleet had been stranded in enemy space with no food, no fuel, and no hope. The Velith had found them. They had given the humans everything they had, even though it meant their own people would go hungry. They had saved 10,000 human lives and asked for nothing in return. Humanity had never forgotten. "Send this signal to Earth Command immediately," Yuki ordered. "Priority 1. Use my personal code." The message traveled across space at speeds that would have seemed like magic to humans just a few centuries ago. It passed through relay stations and jump gates, crossing thousands of light years in minutes. When it reached Earth, it was already midnight in Geneva, where the United Earth Navy had its headquarters. Admiral Chen Wei was sleeping when his communicator began to beep. He was an old man now, with gray hair and tired eyes, but he had been a soldier for 50 years. He knew the sound of an emergency alert. He read the message 3 times. Then he read it again. His hands did not shake. His face did not change. But something dark and dangerous woke up behind his eyes. He made one call. Within the hour, the leaders of humanity gathered in a virtual meeting room. Presidents and generals, scientists and admirals. All of them pulled from their beds to hear what the admiral had to say. "The Keithavari Dominion has invaded Sanctuary 7, Chen Wei said, his voice calm and steady. "They are harvesting the Velith population. Early estimates suggest they have already taken 400,000 civilians." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about the Keithavari. They were an ancient empire that had existed for 10,000 years. They did not conquer worlds. They consumed them. They took the populations of weaker species and processed them for biological resources. To them, other beings were not people. They were meat. "The Velith have no military," one of the politicians said. "They cannot fight back." "No," Admiral Chen agreed. "They cannot." "And you want us to fight for them? Against the Keithavari?" Another voice full of doubt. "Their fleet is 3 times the size of ours. Their empire has crushed dozens of rebellions. The mathematics do not support this action." Admiral Chen looked at the speaker. His eyes were cold. "The Velith saved our people when we were weak and dying. They gave us food when they had none. They gave us hope when we had lost everything." He paused. Mathematics did not support their decision either. They did it anyway. The room was quiet again. "I am not asking for permission," the Admiral continued. "I am informing you of my decision. The United Earth Navy will respond to this emergency signal. We will go to Sanctuary 7th, and we will show the Keithavari what happens when you touch our friends." He turned to face the assembled leaders of humanity. His voice was no longer calm. It was fire and iron and the promise of violence. "Wake the fleets," he said. All of them. Across human space, the machines of war began to move. On Mars, shipyards that had been silent for decades roared back to life. Engineers who had never built weapons of war suddenly found themselves working around the clock. On Titan, young soldiers received orders they had trained for but never expected to use. On Earth, factories switched from making consumer goods to producing ammunition and armor. In the halls of the Galactic Concord, the great alliance of alien species that governed the galaxy, diplomats watched with growing concern. The Velith were a minor species. They had no strategic value. They controlled no important resources. Why would humanity risk everything for them? Ambassador Thelvex of the Concord Council, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, requested a meeting with the human envoy. He needed to understand. "This is madness," when he said. "The Kethvari will destroy you. Your fleet is strong, but theirs is stronger. Your soldiers are brave, but they have millions. Why are you doing this?" The human envoy, a woman named Sarah Park, looked at the alien ambassador. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because someone called for help," she said simply, "and we answer." Thelvex stared at her. In all his centuries of diplomacy, he had never understood humans. They did things that made no sense. They took risks that no logical species would take. They died for ideas and principles that had no material value. And somehow, against all reason, they kept winning. "You will start a war," he warned. Sarah Park stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back. "No," she said. "We will finish one." In the darkness of space, the human fleets began to gather. 400 warships, 2 million soldiers, and in the deepest vaults of the military, weapons that had been locked away for generations were brought back into the light. The galaxy had forgotten what humanity was capable of. They were about to remember. The planet Mars had changed much in 300 years. What was once a dead red desert was now a world of cities and forests, of oceans and mountains made by human hands. But the most impressive thing on Mars was not its terraformed surface. It was the shipyards. They hung in orbit like metal spiders, each one capable of building warships the size of small cities. For the past 50 years, most of them had been quiet. Peace had made them unnecessary. But now, as the emergency signal spread across human space, the shipyards woke from their long sleep. Chief Engineer Maria Santos stood on the observation deck of Shipyard 7, watching as thousands of workers rushed to their stations. Sparks flew in the darkness of space as welding machines came alive. Giant robotic arms began moving materials that had been sitting in storage for decades. "How long?" Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system. Maria checked her calculations. "The main fleet is ready now, but if you want the heavy carriers and the siege ships, we need 3 more days." "You have 2, Maria smiled grimly. "Then we will work without sleep. We always do." On Earth, the mood was different. In the great cities, people gathered around screens to watch the news. They saw images of the Velith, of their gentle faces and delicate wings. They heard the stories of how the Velith had saved humanity long ago, and they felt something rise up inside them, something old and powerful. Anger. In New York, a crowd gathered outside the United Nations building. They were not protesting. They were demanding action. Their signs read simple messages: "Remember the debt, and we answer," and "Humanity marches forward." In Tokyo, young people lined up at military recruitment centers. Many of them had never held a weapon in their lives. It did not matter. They wanted to help. In Lagos, factories that made cars and phones began to make something else: ammunition, medical supplies, food rations. The workers did not complain about the extra hours. They understood what was at stake. Humanity was waking up, and it was angry. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen Wei was having a difficult meeting. The Galactic Concord had sent their representatives to demand an explanation. They sat across from him in a conference room on the moon, their alien faces showing various expressions of concern and confusion. "You must understand," said Ambassador Thelvex, "the Kethvari Dominion is not like other enemies you have faced. They have been a power in this galaxy for 10,000 years. They have destroyed species far older and stronger than yours." Admiral Chen nodded politely. "I appreciate your concern." "Concern?" Another alien, a being made of living crystal called Vorax, made a sound like breaking glass. It was their version of laughter. We are not concerned, Admiral. We are terrified. If you attack the Kethvari, they will respond with everything they have. And when they are done with you, they may decide to punish the rest of us for being your friends. Then perhaps, Admiral Chen said calmly, you should not be our friends. The room went silent. We did not come here to threaten, Thelvik said carefully. We came to offer advice. The Concord has resources, diplomatic channels. Perhaps we can negotiate with the Kethavari. Perhaps we can buy the freedom of some Velith. A compromise. Admiral Chen stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Do you know what the Kethvari are doing right now? He asked. Right at this moment? No one answered. They are processing Velith children. They are taking living beings and turning them into fuel and food and raw materials. Not because they need to. They have plenty of resources. They do it because they can. Because no one has ever stopped them, he turned back to face the aliens. You talk about compromise, about negotiation, about mathematics and acceptable losses. But there are some things that cannot be calculated, some debts that must be paid in blood. He pressed a button on the table. A hologram appeared, showing a massive weapon system. It was beautiful and terrible, like a sword made of light. Do you know what this is? The aliens stared at the hologram with growing horror. The Prometheus Protocol, Vorax whispered. We thought you destroyed it. The Concord demanded. The Concord demanded. Humanity listened. And then we put it in storage. Admiral Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. We knew that someday someone would do something so evil that we would need it again. You cannot use that weapon, Thelvik said. It violates 17 treaties. It could destabilize entire star systems. Yes, Admiral Chen agreed. It could. The aliens looked at each other. They had known humans for 300 years. They had traded with them, worked with them, even fought beside them. But in this moment, they realized they had never truly understood them. Humans were not just another species among many. They were something else entirely, something dangerous. The Conquered will not support this action, Thelvik said finally. If you proceed alone. Admiral Chen nodded. We have always been alone, Ambassador. That is why we are so good at surviving. As the aliens left, Admiral Chen turned back to the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the cold stars, the Velith were dying. Every minute he waited, more of them were lost. He thought about his grandmother, who had been on one of those stranded ships so long ago. She had told him stories about the Velith who saved her, how they had shared their last food, how they had sung songs to keep the children calm, how they had never once complained about the sacrifice they were making. For your grandmother, he whispered to himself, for all of them. He opened a channel to the fleet. This is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy. In 6 hours, we begin the jump to Sanctuary 7. The enemy is strong. The enemy is old. The enemy has never known defeat. He paused. But the enemy has never fought us. They have never seen what humans can do when we are angry. They do not know that we do not calculate the cost of doing what is right. We simply do it. His voice grew harder. Some of you will not come back. I will not lie to you about that. But I promise you this. The Velith will know that we came. The Kethvari will learn what happens when they touch our friends. And the galaxy will remember that when someone calls for help, humanity answers. Across 400 ships, 2 million voices responded as one. We answer. The engines began to warm up, the weapons began to charge, and humanity began its long march toward war. In the darkness of space, the Kethvari Dominion had no idea what was coming. They were about to learn, the hard way. The jump gates were ancient things. No one knew who had built them. They had existed long before any of the current species in the galaxy had learned to walk upright. They connected distant parts of space, allowing ships to travel in hours what would normally take years. The human fleet entered the first gate in perfect formation. 400 ships, ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, disappeared into the swirling blue light and emerged on the other side of the galaxy. 47 jumps. That was how many they needed to reach Sanctuary 7. Under normal circumstances, with proper rest stops and maintenance breaks, the journey would take months. Admiral Chen had ordered it done in 6 days. The crew of the UN Perseverance had not slept in 3 days. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka walked through the corridors of her ship, checking on her people. They were tired. She could see it in their eyes, but none of them complained. In the medical bay, she found Dr. James Wright preparing surgical equipment. He had been a civilian doctor before joining the Navy. He had never treated a combat wound in his life. "Are you ready?" Yuki asked him. He looked up at her with honest eyes. "No, but I will be when the time comes." That was the human way. They were never ready. They became ready. On the dreadnought Unconquered, the largest ship in the fleet, Captain Marcus Cole gathered his senior officers for a briefing. The holographic display showed the enemy positions around Sanctuary 7. 600 warships, he said, pointing to the red dots that surrounded the planet. Their flagship is the Devourer, a command vessel the size of a small moon. Overlord Keth Zul commands from there. One of his officers, a woman named Lieutenant Nina Okonkwo, studied the display. Their formation is defensive. They are not expecting an attack. "Why would they?" Captain Cole replied. "No one has ever attacked the Keith Veri. They are the hunters, not the hunted." He turned off the display and looked at his officers. "I am not going to give you a speech about honor or duty. You know why we are here. Somewhere down there on that planet, innocent people are being turned into meat. Every hour we delay, more of them die." He picked up his helmet from the table. "So we will not delay. We will not wait. We will hit them so hard and so fast that they will not know what happened until it is over." Nina Okonkwo smiled. "What if the mathematics say we cannot win?" Captain Cole laughed. It was a dark, dangerous laugh. "We do not do mathematics. We do spite." The phrase spread through the fleet like fire. Soldiers painted it on their armor. Pilots wrote it on their cockpits. Engineers carved it into the hulls of their ships. "We do not do mathematics. We do spite." Meanwhile, on Sanctuary the 7th, the Velith were dying. Overlord Keth Zul watched the processing from his command throne on the Devourer. He was a massive creature, covered in black armor that had grown from his own body over centuries. His eyes glowed with a cold red light. The Velith were efficient prey. Their bodies contained rare biological compounds that were valuable to the Dominion. More importantly, they were weak. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no will to fight. "How many today?" Keth Zul asked his subordinate, a smaller Kethvari named Vorketh. 40,000 processed, Overlord. We should complete the harvest within 2 weeks." Keth Zul made a sound of satisfaction. Another world consumed. Another species that would soon exist only in memory. This was the natural order of things. The strong survived, the weak were eaten. "Overlord," another officer interrupted, "we are receiving a transmission from our border scouts. A fleet is approaching through the jump gates." Keth Zul was not concerned. Many species had tried to interfere with Dominion harvests over the centuries. All of them had failed. "How many ships?" 400, Overlord. They appear to be human." For the first time in a very long time, Keth Zul felt something like surprise. Humans were a young species. They had joined the galactic community only 300 years ago. They were not known for military power. Humans? Why would humans come here? "Unknown, Overlord. They are not responding to our communications." Keth Zul considered this. The humans were strange creatures. They had spread quickly across the galaxy, building colonies and trade routes with unusual speed. But they had always been peaceful, cooperative, weak. "Send them a warning. Tell them to turn back or be destroyed." The message was sent. For several hours there was no response. Then finally a single transmission came from the human fleet. It was not words. It was an image. A human hand, making a gesture. The middle finger extended upward. Keth Zul did not understand the meaning, but his intelligence officers did. They had studied human culture. They knew exactly what that gesture meant. "Overlord," Vorketh said nervously, "perhaps we should reinforce our defensive positions. Against 400 ships, we have 600. The mathematics are in our favor." "Yes, Overlord, but the humans, they do not seem to care about mathematics." Keth Zul dismissed the concern. He had been fighting wars for 3,000 years. He had destroyed species that had been old when humans were still living in caves. What could these young creatures possibly do against him? He would find out soon enough. On the human flagship, Admiral Chen received the latest intelligence reports. The Kethvari were holding position. They were confident in their numbers. They did not believe the humans would actually attack. "They think we are bluffing," Admiral Chen said to his staff. Captain Cole's face appeared on the communication screen. "Should we teach them otherwise, Admiral?" "Soon, Captain. Very soon." Admiral Chen looked at the star map. They were 12 hours from Sanctuary 7, 12 hours from the largest battle humanity had ever fought, 12 hours from either victory or destruction. He thought about the Velith, still dying on that distant planet. He thought about his grandmother and the debt that had waited 300 years to be paid. "All ships," he announced. "Final preparations. In 12 hours, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of." Across the fleet, soldiers checked their weapons. Pilots climbed into their fighters. Engineers made final adjustments to the engines. Doctors prepared their operating rooms. No one slept. No one complained. Everyone knew that some of them would not survive the coming battle, but they also knew that it did not matter. Some things were more important than survival. Some debts could only be paid in blood. The fleet jumped through the final gate. Sanctuary 7 appeared on their screens, surrounded by enemy ships. The time for talking was over. The time for war had begun. The Battle of Sanctuary the 7th began at exactly 600 hours, Galactic Standard Time. In the years that followed, military scholars across the galaxy would study it. They would write thousands of books trying to understand what happened. Most of them would fail, because what happened that day was not about tactics or strategy or superior technology. It was about something the other species had never truly understood: human rage. Admiral Chen gave a single command: "All ships, attack." 400 human vessels surged forward like wolves released from chains. They did not move in the careful formations that other species used. They moved in chaos, each ship choosing its own path, its own target, its own way to bring death to the enemy. The Kethvari fleet responded with practiced precision. They had fought 100 battles just like this one. Their ships moved into defensive positions. Their weapon systems locked onto the incoming humans. They fired. And then they watched in horror as the humans did not stop. The first wave of human destroyers took heavy damage. Ships exploded. Crews died. But the survivors did not retreat. They kept coming, their weapons blazing, their engines screaming. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Captain Marcus Cole stood watching the battle unfold. One of his officers reported that the destroyer, Relentless, had lost its main weapons. "Tell them to retreat," the officer suggested. Captain Cole shook his head. "The Relentless knows what to do." On the Relentless, Commander Sarah Kim looked at her remaining crew. Half of them were dead. The ship was burning, but the engines still worked. "All hands," she announced calmly. "It has been an honor. Target the enemy carrier, full speed." The Relentless hit the Kethvari carrier at maximum velocity. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire. 3,000 Kethvari died instantly. The carrier's fighter bays were destroyed. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships that were too damaged to fight turned themselves into weapons. They crashed into enemy vessels, into shield generators, into anything that would hurt the Kethvari. Overlord Keth Zul watched from his command throne with growing disbelief. In 3,000 years, he had never seen anything like this. "They are insane," he said. "They are throwing away their ships." "Overlord," Vorketh replied nervously, "they are also winning." It was true. Despite being outnumbered, the humans were tearing through the Kethvari fleet. Their chaotic movements made them impossible to predict. Their willingness to sacrifice made them impossible to stop. And then the ground assault began. Human dropships fell from orbit like rain. The Kethvari had fortified their harvesting camps with walls and guns, and thousands of soldiers. They believed these defenses were unbreakable. The first human soldier to land was Sergeant Maria Santos, no relation to the engineer on Mars. She hit the ground with 50 soldiers from the 101st Orbital Infantry. They were immediately surrounded by Kethvari warriors. The Kethvari were bigger, stronger. Their claws could tear through steel. Their armor could stop most weapons. Maria Santos did not care. "For the Velith!" she screamed and charged. The fighting was brutal. Human soldiers died by the hundreds, but for every human that fell, 10 Kethvari fell with them. The humans fought with a fury that the Kethvari had never encountered. They did not stop when they were wounded. They did not surrender when they were surrounded. They kept fighting until they could not move anymore. In one camp, a young soldier named Private Tom Baker was separated from his unit. His rifle was empty. His armor was broken. 3 Kethvari warriors surrounded him. He picked up a piece of metal from the ground and smiled. "Come on then," he said. "Let us see how you like fighting fair." They found his body later, surrounded by the corpses of 7 Kethvari. He had killed 4 more after losing his makeshift weapon, with his bare hands. On the Devourer, Overlord Kethzul received report after report of defeat. His defensive lines were breaking. His soldiers were dying. His ships were burning. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are weaker than us, smaller than us. Their technology is not superior. How are they doing this?" No one could answer him. Then at hour 9 of the battle, something worse happened. Admiral Chen's voice came over all channels, broadcast to both human and Kethvari ships. "Overlord Kethzul, you have one chance to surrender. Release the Velith prisoners. Withdraw your forces. Face justice for your crimes." Kethzul laughed. Despite his losses, he still had 3 command ships. Each one was the size of a small moon. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. "Surrender? To you? You have fought well, human, but you cannot destroy my command ships. They are invincible." There was a pause. Then Admiral Chen spoke again. "I was hoping you would say that." The Prometheus protocol was activated. No one knew exactly what the weapon was. Some said it tore holes in space itself. Others said it released energy from other dimensions. All anyone knew was the result. The first Kethvari command ship simply stopped existing. One moment it was there. The next moment there was nothing. Not debris, not explosion. Just empty space where a moon-sized ship had been. The second command ship tried to retreat. The Prometheus weapon found it anyway. It vanished like the first. Kethzul watched his third command ship die. His invincible fleet, built over 10,000 years, was being erased from existence. "What are you?" he whispered. The human fleet surrounded the Devourer. Kethzul's ship was alone now, damaged, helpless. Marines boarded the vessel. They fought through corridors designed for creatures twice their size. They climbed walls and squeezed through spaces that should have been too small. They found Kethzul in his throne room, surrounded by his personal guards. The guards died quickly. Captain Marcus Cole stood before the Overlord, his armor covered in blood that was not his own. "Overlord Kethzul, by the authority of the United Earth Navy, you are under arrest for crimes against sentient beings." Kethzul looked at the human. This small, fragile creature that should have been prey. This young species that should have been nothing. "You were supposed to be the weak ones," he said. "The young ones." Captain Cole grabbed the Overlord by his throat and lifted him from his throne. Despite the size difference, despite the strength difference, the human held him like he weighed nothing. "We were," Cole said coldly. "Then we grew up." The remaining Kethvari fleet fled into hyperspace. They left behind their dead, their prisoners, their camps. They ran from the humans like animals running from fire. The Battle of Sanctuary 7 was over. It had lasted 11 hours. Humanity had won. The silence after battle is a strange thing. For 11 hours, the space around Sanctuary 7 had been filled with fire and screaming metal and the dying cries of thousands. Now there was only the quiet hum of engines and the soft beeping of rescue beacons. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at the wreckage. Broken ships floated in the darkness, both human and Kethvari. Each one was a grave. Each one was a story that would never be finished. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "final casualty count is coming in." Chen nodded. He had been waiting for this, dreading it. 40,000 dead, sir. Another 20,000 wounded. 40,000. 40,000 sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, friends and lovers, gone forever because he had given an order. He closed his eyes for a moment, then he opened them again. "And the Velith. 312,000 rescued from the camps. Another 200,000 are still on the planet, hiding from the Kethvari. Medical teams are treating them now. More than 500,000 lives saved. It did not make the losses hurt less, but it gave them meaning. On the surface of Sanctuary 7, Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka walked through what had been a harvesting camp. The machines were silent now, their terrible work ended. Human engineers were taking them apart, making sure they could never be used again. She found a group of Velith huddled together in what had been a holding cell. They were thin and weak, their delicate wings damaged, their large eyes filled with trauma. But they were alive. One of them, an elder with faded colors on her wings, approached Yuki slowly. The Velith did not speak human languages well, but she tried. "You came," she said. "We sent the signal, and you came." Yuki knelt down so she was at eye level with the elder. "Of course we came. We owed you a debt." The Velith made a sound that might have been laughter or crying. That was 300 years ago. Many species have forgotten. Why do humans remember? Yuki thought about this. She thought about her grandmother's stories, passed down through generations. She thought about all the humans who had grown up hearing about the kindness of the Velith, about the debt that had never been repaid. "Because we choose to remember," she said finally. "Because some debts do not fade with time. Because someone had to show the galaxy that kindness is not weakness, and that good deeds are never forgotten." The elder reached out with a trembling hand and touched Yuki's face. It was a gesture of profound gratitude in Velith culture. "Tell your people," she said. "Tell them that the Velith will remember this day for all the centuries to come. Tell them that they have friends in the stars who will never forget what humanity did for us." Meanwhile, in the great halls of the Galactic Concord, a very different conversation was taking place. Ambassador Thelvex stood before the council, his silver face showing barely controlled anger. Behind him, a holographic display showed images of the battle, of the Prometheus weapon, of the destroyed Kethavari command ships. "The humans have violated 17 treaties," he announced. "They have used weapons of mass destruction. They have invaded sovereign territory without Concord approval. They have destabilized a region of space that has been balanced for millennia." The other council members murmured their agreement. This was unprecedented. This was dangerous. Something had to be done. Then the human ambassador arrived. Yuki Tanaka, recently promoted from lieutenant commander, walked into the chamber wearing her dress uniform. It was still stained with dust from Sanctuary 7. She had not had time to change. She had not wanted to. "Ambassador Tanaka," Thelvex said coldly, "do you have anything to say in your species' defense?" Yuki looked around at the assembled aliens. These were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They controlled empires that spanned thousands of stars. They had been making laws and keeping order since before humans had discovered fire, and they had done nothing while the Velith died. "You call it balance," she said, her voice steady. "We call it cowardice." The chamber went silent. You watched the Velith die because the mathematics did not favor intervention. You calculated acceptable losses while children were processed into fuel. You spoke of diplomacy and negotiation while innocent people screamed for help that never came. She walked forward toward the center of the chamber. "We do not calculate, we act. We saw evil, and we destroyed it. We heard a call for help, and we answered it. And if that makes us dangerous, then good. The galaxy needs something to be afraid of that is not the monsters." Thelvex's four hands clenched into fists. "And what of the treaties you violated? What of the order you disrupted?" Yuki smiled. It was the smile of a species that had learned to survive against all odds, that had turned its weaknesses into strengths, that had built an empire from nothing but determination and spite. "Keep your treaties," she said. "We will write our own." She turned and walked out of the chamber. No one tried to stop her. In the years that followed, everything changed. The Kethavari Dominion collapsed. Without their leadership, without their invincible fleet, the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years fell apart. Species that had been too afraid to resist suddenly found their courage. Rebellions broke out across Kethavari space. Within a decade, the Dominion was nothing but a memory. The Galactic Concord learned to fear humanity, not because humans were cruel or aggressive, but because they were unpredictable. They did things that made no logical sense. They took risks that no rational species would take. They fought for ideals instead of resources, for principles instead of profit. And they won. On the memorial wall at United Earth Naval Headquarters, the names of the 40,000 who died at Sanctuary 7 were carved in stone. Every year on the anniversary of the battle, millions of humans came to pay their respects. They brought flowers and candles. They spoke the names of the dead out loud, making sure they would never be forgotten. Admiral Chen Wei, now retired, came every year until the day he died. He would stand before the wall for hours, reading each name, remembering each face. "Was it worth it?" his grandson asked him once. "All those lives for a species that was not even our own?" The old admiral looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen too much death and not enough peace. "There are some things more important than survival," he said. "Honor, loyalty, keeping the promises that matter. If we lose those things, then we are not worth saving anyway." The grandson did not understand. He was young, but someday when he was older and wiser, he would. All humans understood eventually. On 100 worlds in 1,000 languages, the oppressed and the hunted and the desperate learned a new phrase. They whispered it to each other in the dark. They taught it to their children. They carved it on walls and painted it on ships. Send the signal. The humans will come. Because somewhere out there, among the cold and silent stars, there was a species that remembered its debts, a species that answered calls for help, a species that refused to calculate the cost of doing what was right. Humanity had marched forward to destroy the opposition, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten. That compassion was not weakness. That kindness could be strength. That sometimes the young and the small and the supposedly weak were the most dangerous things of all. The emergency signal had been received, and humanity had answered. Forever.